Hi, I'm Paulo Shakarian, CEO and co-founder of Cyricon. Thanks for taking the time today. So we're going to talk about two different mindsets for prioritizing software vulnerabilities. One we'll call asset-based, looking at the value of the asset in the enterprise that has that vulnerability. And the other we'll call threat-based, which is how likely it is that a threat actor will exploit a software vulnerability. Now, in terms of looking at NIST CVSS, one can say that, well, one has to do with impact, the other has to do with exploitability. I'm going to put that aside for now. We have a separate video about the NIST CVSS scoring system, but all suffice to say that the impact score for a vulnerability does not consider a specific enterprise, while the exploitability score does not consider threat intelligence about the vulnerability. And we're talking about prioritization that inherently considers those two things. So let's talk about asset-based prioritization. So here we're looking at the importance of an asset. So maybe it's a database that stores your customer data, or maybe it's a web server that supports e-commerce activity for your SaaS-based solution. You might say, hey, those are really important systems. I want to make sure we patch them as best as we possibly can. Now, looking at the threat-based approach, now you're looking at where are the available exploits, where there's evidence that there's new exploits coming out, and you want to take the mindset that, hey, I want to patch these things before they get exploited because I don't want to be breached due to those vulnerabilities. I'm going to put them at the top of my list. So these two ideas are mutually exclusive. And clearly, if you have a vulnerability on an important system and it's extremely likely that there's going to be an exploit for it, that should be patched. And that's essentially where Equifax went wrong. Had an important system, vulnerability that was likely to be exploited, and that back then they missed the mark on both. From what I understand, things are much better at Equifax security nowadays. But let's consider a couple edge cases. What about these ransomware attacks we've been having? There's been a lot of ransomware attacks since the start of the pandemic. Many of them have originated on computer systems that have not been considered critical assets, people's laptops, endpoints, and so on. Yet, the ransomware was able to spread from those systems elsewhere in the corporate network. Yet it would be highly unlikely that those systems, which were kind of in the larger pool of stuff, would have been considered a high value asset by anyone's metric. Likewise, let's look at, say, maybe something like a local privilege escalation vulnerability on a high value server. And I have everything else patched on this high value server. I have other mitigations in place. What is the probability that someone gets into that machine and executes on that local privilege escalation vulnerability, especially if there's no known exploit or evidence of exploit to that vuln? Probably pretty low. So, how do you decide the difference between the two? And this is, this can be very tricky. I think the thing that one must consider is more of a risk-based approach, whereby which action is going to reduce risk to the enterprise the most. And so clearly, when you have something that's likely to occur, and it's likely to occur in a place where a lot of damage can be done, that's where resources should be allocated. Now, we have to still consider something called lateral movement by the hackers. If it's a low value asset and the hacker totally takes over that low value asset, they might be able to work their way over to a higher value computer system through legitimate authentication. And that is something that needs to be considered in a risk assessment. I would say a second thing one should consider besides assessing overall risk is to look at the ability to triage. If there are a small number of vulnerabilities that hackers are likely to use, then you should patch those everywhere. You should put your resources into that because that's stopping the threat. And then maybe allocate your resources to the critical systems where there's not evidence of threat against vulnerabilities, some of those vulnerabilities on the systems that you didn't hit in the first go around, but you want to seal them up. And that might be a little smarter approach than just fixing everything in the critical systems and then looking at everything else. In our view, it's a lot smarter to hit what the bad guys are able to target first because of these issues of lateral movement and just what we've seen with ransomware. So anyway, these are just our thoughts on this topic based on what we've seen and people we've talked to in the industry, other security professionals. Hope you found the insights in this video useful as you work on your vulnerability management and risk management practices. And stay tuned for more videos from our website or YouTube channel. Thank you very much.